these questions. I'm assuming if members are brisk, and I know the Mayor will be brisk, that we might be able to get through more quickly than that. If I may, to sort out any confusion, because I think you all have papers, explain the way in which we are doing this. On this occasion, and I should say the way in which we're going to take the questions, the procedure is for this occasion only. Between now and the next meeting, Standard Orders Committee will be meeting to discuss how we can best use this session to ensure that the key issues are tackled, to ensure that questions are asked by a range of members of the Assembly from different parties and different backgrounds, and that the session itself is lively and to the point. Now, on this occasion, the leaders had agreed that what we would try to do was to group questions that had been submitted and not ask them strictly according to standing orders in the order in which they had been submitted individually. There has been that by one political group on the Assembly, and I should say, though there is a majority for a slightly more inclusive way of approaching this, the view taken by the other three leaders, namely Toby Harris, Darren Johnson and Graham Tope, is that every political group really, as it were, should have its views respected, and therefore, because of the points raised by the Conservative group, we intend to stick strictly to standing orders and take the questions in the order in which they were submitted. And that means we'll be approaching them in a different order to the ones you've got them on your papers. So what I'll do on each case is tell you which number on the paper you've got we're dealing with. It'll become clear as we go through. I know it's as clear as mud at the moment.
How many Green Party questions do you anticipate will be called according to this procedure?
Excuse me, Victor. I don't know yet. Can I finish my explanation? On each question, we're not going to ask the Assembly member to repeat the question or read it out. We'll just name it, say which number it is, and the Mayor will answer. The Assembly member who has asked the question will have the right to ask two supplementaries. In each case, any member who doesn't want to have an oral answer can say a written answer will suffice. So that in each case, I will say which question it is, number 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. The Assembly member can say a written answer will suffice, in which case we'll pass on to the next one. If the Assembly member doesn't say that, the Mayor will answer, and the Assembly member will have two supplementaries. The only other point I'd want to make before we begin is that should any individual on the Assembly be mentioned by another Assembly member, I do have to give them the right to respond. The same is true of any political group. And I'm saying at this point that one reason why I want to do that is that this is questions for the Mayor. It is not an opportunity for people to ask questions of other political groups or other individuals on the Assembly, and I hope to essentially discourage the use of this session for any other purpose than holding the Mayor to account. So, now, Victor, you had a point of order.
My question is, how many Green Party questions do you anticipate will be called according to this procedure?
The straight answer is I have no idea. It depends how quickly we get on with it.
I think the answer is none.
Well, if I may say, and this is true for, I speak purely in my role as Chair of the Assembly, the only point here is that those who got in first will get their questions asked first, and it was purely a matter of speed. And those of us who didn't get there first, what can we say? We can't whinge about it. We tip our hats to those who did. Right, can we begin? Question 1, which is also your question 1, from Bob Neal. Written answer?
No, thank you, Chair. I'd be grateful for an oral answer. Can I just make it...
No, you can't.
Can I just make it clear,
No, you
Chair?
can't,
Well,
Bob.
I'm sorry, Chair, I'm going to make this because you've mentioned
you will
our
have
group...
You will have a chance to speak in a moment with your supplementary, and you can make any point you want to make.
Well, I'm a bit concerned at your lack of partiality already shown, Chair.
Okay, you can say whatever you like when you ask your supplementary. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Can I say, it does seem to me it could be very easy simply to say that having won the election, I have a mandate to proceed to impose the congestion charge. And given that was the position of the Liberal and the Green candidates, we could argue that this is a settled issue. I think that would be to ignore the good advice of Winston Churchill that in victory there is magnanimity. What I have been given is the chance to create a public consensus to bring this policy forward. And a simple, narrow majority isn't enough. To make such a major and substantial change in patterns of transport is going to require building a consensus. I estimate that we will take 2 years in consultation before this congestion charge comes in. And over that period, I hope we can achieve agreement about the area of the zone, the pricing structure, and the exemptions on the zone. And I will be consulting very widely indeed. The Labour Party and the Labour government are not opposed to the congestion charge. The Prime Minister made absolutely clear the important thing is a system that works and which doesn't create what I think were called checkpoint charges and £1,000 charges and so on. There's no question of that. We're looking for something that works, and I'll be working closely, particularly with the business community that's done a lot of work in this area already.
Okay, first supplementary, Bob Neal.
First of all, can I apologise that you've had to cross-reference Ken as far as that is concerned. That's not of our doing, let me make it abundantly clear. The Conservative group were willing to look at a variation of the order of business as well. It's just that the document that you were given didn't accurately reflect the agreement that we had reached. So that's one of those things. I just want that clear for the record. From what you say, and I understand your position on congestion charging, which has always been perfectly clear, if you're anticipating that you would have a consensus rather than a narrow majority for the introduction of congestion charges in, say, 2 years' time, any group of members which has signed up to the opposition to congestion charges for the next 4 years is clearly going to have to shift their ground for you to achieve that, aren't they?
Well, no, as I recall, the only party that was opposed in principle was the Conservative Party and the Conservative Party candidate. Though I have to say, it was actually Stephen Norris who first pushed the idea of congestion charge through as government policy when he was Minister of Transport for London. And I think I had very little doubt that had Stephen Norris actually been elected, within a year or two, he would have most likely come back to the Assembly and said, well, look, I know I was opposed to this, but the facts are overwhelming, we have to go ahead. No one's created this on an ideological basis. If anything, the ideological basis of congestion charges comes from the Chicago School of Economics and Milton Friedman. And we are proceeding with it because London has terrible problems of congestion, terrible problems of pollution, and we see this as a solution.
Ken, did you see the Prime Minister's comment in the House of Commons last week? Quotes, no, the Labour members of the GLA, as far as I'm aware, have made it clear that they do not support congestion charging, which is exactly what it says on the front page of the Labour manifesto for these elections. I know where you stand, you know where I stand, but I wonder why you are so intent upon introducing a form of taxation which is in fact deeply regressive because it takes no account of ability to pay.
Oh, I would much rather have a more sophisticated and complex system, but that isn't what's on offer for us. I can only say this, that in the summer of 1998 I wrote to the Prime Minister saying that I thought one of the major defects in the government's proposals for a Mayor and Assembly for London was that the Mayor wasn't to have a congestion charge, and I urged him strongly to change the legislation so that it would be done. I know many borough councillors and many MPs made the same points, and when the Prime Minister announced that in his speech to the Labour Party conference in 1998, I thought that was a wise and courageous stand, and I'm very grateful that I'm now in a position where I can give substance to that policy.
Okay, thank you. As I indicated, I would give a short opportunity for groups or individuals mentioned. In this particular question, Labour groups have been mentioned. Who's speaking for that? Toby Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I am aware that the Conservative Party is trying to misrepresent Labour policy, even down to misrepresenting what was on the front cover of our manifesto, which, if I recall correctly, had the signature Frank and then said, "to the point" underneath. I don't think it mentioned congestion charging on the front cover. But let us be clear, this Assembly has, in essence, endorsed the Labour Party's policy, the Labour Party's manifesto policy on this. We have made it clear at our last meeting that the Assembly agrees, and these are the words from the Labour Party manifesto, that it is not against congestion charging in principle. If such charges are introduced, and it is a matter for the Mayor to bring proposals forward, we have to be clear that there are going to be public transport improvements and the means of operating the charges do not add to the problems of congestion that they are intended to solve. I think that is clear. The Prime Minister in the House of Commons on 3 separate occasions has reiterated support for the Labour Party manifesto, and he said, not surprisingly, that Labour members of this Assembly also support that manifesto and act on it. I think our position is clear.
Thank you very much. We proceed to question
Trevor,
2,
can I say, Jim, there is a problem. I just realised that on my answers, I only have the number in the order that they were to be called. I have no way of finding my answer in this pile in any reasonable time. But I mean, my answers are different from the officers have their suggested answers. The ones before me are to some degree different. I mean, literally, I have no way of getting the questions in. I would have to sift through all 40 questions if you're going to call them out of the order in which I have assembled them. I don't want to be difficult.
I know you don't want to be difficult. I know there's nobody around here who wants to create any difficulty for anybody else in this room. I understand exactly the problem you're raising, and of course we have exactly the same difficulty on this side, but I'm sure you'll understand our desire to respect the needs of all the political groups. Now, we can do one of 2 things. We can give you 5 minutes to try and sort it out.
Sorry, Trevor, I'm sorry. What I have got in front of me are 40 answers, and on none of these is the original number. So I have to ask to adjourn perhaps for half an hour whilst we resort these.
Ken, I can tell you what the original number is as we come to it.
I haven't got the original number on my answers. That's the problem.
Chairman, I think you're going to have to give Ken an adjournment. It's only fair to him. It's not his fault. I've got to say, Chairman, the fault for this lies with the fact that this document was only produced at 2 o'clock and was given to the Mayor before the party leaders had given their agreement to it. So it's not Ken's fault. So you ought to have an adjournment.
I think that it'll be good for us to have lots of heat in this, but I frankly don't think we need to have a major world war over the numbering of questions. What I'd like to do is to have a 5-minute adjournment so we can sort out Ken's answers so he is able to answer to his satisfaction.
I will do my best.
Yeah, I know you will. Okay, 5-minute adjournment.
Has anyone got any idea what the bloody...
All back together again. Thank you very much. The next question, Eric Ollerenshaw, will be your question 4. And for all of those in the audience, it'll be question 4 under appointments in the papers you have. Eric, would you take a written answer?
Orally, please, Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
At the moment, none of my advisers are paid by the Greater London Authority. I've advertised a mixture of policy and administrative posts in the Evening Standard. These posts will be members of GLA staff, and I will be happy to provide their names to the Assembly. I do not think it would be appropriate to provide details of individuals' qualifications, however.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask, Mr. Mayor, why you've chosen the procedure under 67, I think, Section 67, Part 2 of the Act, in terms of these appointments? Would my understanding be correct that under this advert you put in the Evening Standard, which I think is for 21 people at an approximate cost of $806,200 as your personal staff, that was the reason you chose that section, as under 67(1), my understanding is you could only appoint 12 staff.
Oh, no, under the Act, the Mayor could appoint 2 political advisors at will and 10 what were called cabinet appointments virtually at will. And there would then have been, in addition, a personal office of secretaries and researchers. My broad view is I would rather not appoint the 2 political advisors or the 10 so-called cabinet ministers, members at will, because those people would, by definition, have a sole loyalty to the Mayor. And I have in my mind the sort of problems in the American system of, say, Chief of Staff in the White House and a bunker mentality that builds up. In going down this route, the staff that will work for me will be paid officials of the Assembly and therefore will be subject to being brought before you and questioned. Nobody working for me will be exempt from questioning by members of the Assembly, and you will also have access to them for policy advice. I'm trying to avoid building up a them and us situation. I know this is an American system and there is a separation of powers, but I don't want to replicate the intensely partisan nature of American politics, where you end up with the sort of nonsense of the American Congress has its own budget office, the President has their own budget structure. I would like to think we could work on the assumption that all the officers serve us impartially, and we then argue about the facts that have been broadly agreed.
Okay, Eric?
My understanding then is, I'm just trying to find out which way we're progressing on this, that your Chief of Staff and yourself, though, would choose all the rest of that so-called Mayor's office or Mayor's inner cabinet, if you like, as against the kind of public cabinet of Mr McDonnell and Ms Shawcross and Mr Harris and all the rest of them. This would be chosen by yourself and just your Chief of Staff, but you would expect them to be also reporting to us as members of the Assembly. Do you think that could become a little bit confusing?
I don't think it'd be confusing. Already individual members of the Assembly have met with some of my policy advisors who are here at the moment on an unpaid basis, and I think have been favourably impressed with their advice, and I want that to continue. You will be having a meeting later on today, members of the Assembly, to discuss the mechanisms of appointments, and you will take that decision about exactly how they are to be appointed. But I'd assume that after the discussions I've had with the leaders of the Assembly members, we have a broad understanding here. We're cooperating in each, both the Mayor and each of the party structures, being able to get a group of people they can work with and feel support from.
Okay, third question from Roger Evans. It is your number 8, Ken. Colleagues, your number 8 is from Roger Evans. Roger, will a written answer do?
I wouldn't ask the Mayor to incriminate himself in writing. I think an oral answer would be wise.
Okay. No would be fine, actually. Okay.
I don't think anyone's going to take a written answer, Trevor. You've got to be kidding. They don't get on telly that way.
I'm an optimist, Ken. You know, I live in hope.
What are you doing in politics if you're an optimist? I've made my position on the euro quite clear on a number of occasions, both during the election and subsequently. I do not think it would be in the interests of London if we remain indefinitely outside the euro, and I hope to be active in persuading people in the forthcoming referendum, whenever it appears, to vote positively to join the euro.
Roger Evans?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Ken, incidentally, for your speech to the Mansion House audience on Monday, which occurred after I submitted this question. So I think we have a much clearer idea of where you stand now than we did at that time. Are you not concerned, though, that the loss of power and sovereignty to this country will actually be much more harmful to London even than it is to the rest of the country?
I think 20 years ago, you could perhaps have argued for Britain surviving outside of the European bloc. Particularly over the last 20 years, the growth of the financial sector in London is so central to our economic health and well-being, and the number of jobs that are based on that far larger than the actual 20% of the London economy, which is our GDP in London, which is from the financial sector. And whereas at the moment I don't think there's any great exodus of firms out of London because we're not in the euro, if it became apparent there was a long-term prospect of us staying out, then I do think this would become a serious problem. At the moment, almost every major corporation based here in London is working on the assumption that Britain will join the euro sometime after the next election. I think if it began to look as though that wasn't the case, then I think you would start to see initially international headquarters not coming here, and then existing headquarters, international companies' headquarters based here, as they came to the end of their lease, would weigh in the balance whether or not to move to Paris or to Berlin or to Frankfurt.
Second supplementary.
I think we're clear on where you and I stand on this, and obviously we're at opposite ends of the spectrum, and I don't seek to persuade you to change your viewpoint. But I think it would be useful for the Assembly to know what sort of contacts you've established with the government nationally to actually push this line, and if you have any help from them.
Well, so far all my contacts with the government have consisted of me saying hello, surprising numbers of them saying congratulations, and then me asking for more money. We haven't got onto the euro yet, but I do hope to play a full role when the government decides to press ahead in actually persuading Londoners. And I think it was interesting, the Evening Standard opinion poll shortly before the election, which asked Londoners' opinion, found that here in London 41% of people supported joining the euro, 43% against. Now that is much closer than in any other region in Britain, and I think that's because the average Londoner is bright enough to recognise that London, more than any other region of Britain, would be devastated if there was a long-term refusal to join the euro.
Okay, thank you. I'm giving everybody latitude. Just remind members you don't have to ask a second supplementary. Okay, fourth question, Richard Barnes. It is your number 9, Ken. Number 9 on page 4 of your papers.
Someone's going to say bingo any minute, aren't they?
And this, this is from Richard Barnes. Britain do, Richard?
I think London always, Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
My decision was not based on my status as MP for Brent East. Wembley Stadium is actually in Brent South, although that is technically to the north of Brent East. But it was based on, I do love our constituency boundaries, but it was based on an understanding that this was an exceptional project that could not be allowed to fail and was at danger of falling or suffering severe delay if councillors in Brent did not receive some assurances before their planning committee meeting next. Nobody would have forgiven the Mayor if I had been responsible for a major delay endangering the prospects of Wembley going ahead and all the prospects for major international fixtures coming to London. By giving Wembley the best assurances I was legally able to do, I was going no further than officials in the Government Office for London already have. On the question of my parliamentary career, I intend to see out my term of office in Brent East, but will not seek re-election. So far, I've had no suggestions from the government whips that I should stand down and cause a by-election. I detect that at the moment there's no great enthusiasm on the part of the government election machine to fight another election in the London area immediately.
Richard Barnes.
There are a number of SRB 6 bids which are important to the particular areas, and indeed Hayes Harlington, John McDonnell's constituency, has a bid in itself. Does the Mayor envisage treating any others as exceptional cases and treating them in advance of his powers?
No, I mean, we're very close to actually, early in June, agreeing a set of priorities on SRB 6, and we will make our decisions then. But this was exceptional because the planning committee needed to meet before the date of that decision, and for those people who've been on a borough council, nothing is more lethal than a solicitor saying, I must warn the members they may be at risk in going ahead with this decision until the Mayor has guaranteed the relevant source of funding. And a delay could have been a really major problem. The development at Wembley is now right down, with all the delays we've already had, right down to the wire.
Richard?
If I might ask a question on your supplementary report, you must find it a comfort to have somebody from your GLC days within your cabinet. I know John McDonnell, he's an MP for one of the constituencies in the borough that I lead. He is long on consultation and short on delivery. What gives you comfort that he will change?
I have to say that when John was my chair of finance at the GLC, he was incredibly industrious and delivered massively. It was him that we relied on to get the money out of the building to the organisations we were funding. He had a massive capacity for work.
Fifth question, Angela Bray, which is your question 2, Ken. It's question 2 on your order paper.
I'll take a verbal answer, please.
Jolly good.
Road user charging is not intended to affect car ownership and therefore car sales, but it is intended to reduce car use in central London, and the consequent pollution and congestion we would therefore hope would also be reduced. And there are, of course, in those areas very good public transport alternatives to car use, and over the next 2 years I intend to improve the quality of public transport, specifically in the area affected by the congestion charge. The road user charging powers in the GLA Act allow the Mayor to keep all net revenues generated from the scheme for a minimum of 10 years and require that they are used only on transport proposals. If a road user charging scheme is introduced, this additional revenue will be used in its entirety to supplement the GLA transport budget.
You talk about improving public transport. Surely it's important to do that before you envisage removing another option for people getting around London, i.e. their cars.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it would be, I think, inconceivable the Mayor would proceed with the congestion charge if public transport hadn't been improved in the intervening 2 years. I would simply point out, if you look at the record of the GLC, we actually improved the capacity of the public transport system in the 6 months between the election in 1981 and the reduction in fares. And I'm certain that over a period of 2 years we can do this. It's also, I think, important, if you fear an impact on car sales, to recognise that in Europe there are much larger proportion of the population own a car, but they use it less. This is not about stopping everybody driving in or stopping some people driving ever. It's about getting about 10% of existing car journeys switched to some other purpose. Some people will do more, some people will do less.
Can I ask you how you're going to measure those improvements in public transport?
Well, as long as I can continue to use public transport myself without fear of physical violence, I suspect things will be picking up.
Thank you very much. Sixth question. I'm worried about that because you and I use the same line. Question 6. This is Elizabeth Howlett.
May I have an oral reply, please?
Mr. Mayor?
All right, here we are. My formal appointments are the Deputy Mayor under Section 49 of the Act, and I've also named Graham Tope, Nicky Gavron, Darren Johnson, John McDonnell and Jude...
Never mind, I'll jump.
I'm sorry, Ken, my fault. This is question 6. It is your question 14.
Right.
And it is about the costs of the new Mayor and GLA offices at More London Bridge.
Right, here we go.
Forgive me.
I've got 70. Carried on a bit.
The construction contract for the new GLA headquarters is the responsibility of the developer, so no details of costs are available to the GLA, and we will simply be paying rent. If there's an increase in costs, it's borne by the developer.
Elizabeth Howlett.
Thank you for that. Mr. Mayor, I welcome the statements you have made publicly with regard to keeping costs of housing yourself, your staff and the Assembly. And I wonder if you could elaborate whether you have had any firm approaches from the owners of the building which is directly across from Westminster, which you used to inhabit, regarding the use of part of that building by yourself, or even perhaps by yourself, your staff and the Assembly.
I did have a letter from the Shiriyama Corporation during the election campaign offering me use of rooms in the building for my election campaign headquarters, but by that time I was just ensconced in Marsham Street and the question of moving was inconceivable. We've had no approach. I know this has been press speculation, but certainly no letter has reached me or any member of my immediate staff or the officials here. So this was a wonderful story in the press, but unfortunately based on complete load of old codswallop.
Thank you. I have no supplementary.
Jolly good, because the next question is yours as well. Question 7, it's Elizabeth Howlett. You're 17,
Oral,
Ken, and you'll take an oral answer,
oral
will you?
reply, please.
Okay, we'll give give the Mayor a few seconds to find it. Question 17.
I've agreed estimated expenditure of 1.65 million for support to Assembly members and party groups. This is an additional £900,000 and will be met from the existing GLA budget. £400,000 of that £900,000 involves switching resources which had provisionally been allocated for support for mayors, the staff of the Mayor, to staff for the Assembly members. I have agreed to pay KPMG £10,000 for consultancy on the structure of the London Development Agency. This was after discussions with London business organisations. This will be met from the existing GLA budget, and the report should be with us in the next day or two. I've also agreed to use the anticipated underspend of £3 million on the GLA budget to establish financial reserves in order to ensure a sound financial base for the GLA.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That all sounds terribly prudent.
That's me.
And perhaps... Well done. You've been taking a book out of Wandsworth's good practice there. Mr.
Get on
Mayor,
with it, you guys.
Mr. Mayor, I obviously didn't catch my question properly. What I really had in mind, and perhaps I should have been a bit more direct, was in fact the public commitment that you had made to Wimbledon Stadium and Dagenham, and I was concerned that perhaps this would prejudice the SRB6 projects which boroughs have got in at the present time. As you know, they add up to a considerable regeneration of certain parts of London, so I was worried that your announcements wouldn't have prejudiced any of the borough's applications.
Well, I have to say, I think if the issue of whether or not to proceed with the contribution to Wembley was left to the entire 25 members of the Assembly, I don't believe any of you would take the odium for wrecking the project either. I should imagine it would be unanimously agreed. On the issue of Dagenham, clearly the crisis at Dagenham has arisen very late in the day in terms of the creation of the bids for SRB6. So far, I have to say, in consultation with the government and with Ford, I do think more money will be coming available, both from Ford and from government. It's my strong belief that should be funneled through the London Development Agency, and that business-led organisation should take the lead, working with local councils and local organisations to trying to tackle what could be a very severe impact on the East London economy if car assembly is discontinued at Ford.
Thank you. I have no supplement.
Thank you very much. I think that's a model of restraint which others might follow. Okay, eighth question from Toby Harris. This is your question 5, and it concerns the Mayor's appointments. Written answer, Toby?
Oral, please.
My cabinet will comprise a mixture of GLA officials, Assembly members and experts from outside the authority. It will meet weekly in public. My intention is Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. And I'm announcing its inclusive, non-partisan membership before its first meeting on the 20th of June. I'm still open to ideas and suggestions and discussions in the meantime. My appointments to the functional bodies are subject to varying degrees and levels of statutory consultation. In the case of the Police Authority and the Fire Authority, my discretion is limited, and I've sought to fill those positions by seeking nominations from the Assembly members, and I think I've been able to accommodate the wishes of the main party groups in each case. In the case of the London Development Agency, there is a statutory process of consultation with the boroughs, business groups, etc., and that is ongoing. I have consulted the Assembly for nominations to the London Development Agency, the Cultural Strategy Group, and Transport for London. I have to try and ensure that these functional bodies are up and running by July the 3rd. I have made no appointments of advisers, beyond naming Graham Tope, Nicky Gavron, Darren Johnson, John McDonnell and Judith Mayhew as Cabinet members, and of course Valerie Shawcross today. However, a mixture of advisory and administrative positions within the Mayor's office was advertised on Monday.
Could I ask the Mayor whether it would be helpful for there to be confirmatory hearings by members of the Assembly to some of the key appointments, particularly in respect of the Board of Transport for London and the Board of the London Development Agency?
I think the reality with the London Development Agency is that the major consensus to be struck is with the three main London business organisations, the London region of the CBI, London First, and the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I think the TUC will be happy. And I would very much hope that the people appointed are happy to appear before the Assembly and answer their questions. But the question of a confirmation isn't covered under the Act. So I appoint, but I do hope you'll get to like them.
And could I ask, in respect of the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority, whether the Mayor has engaged in consultations about individual names with the Fire Brigades Union?
I certainly asked the Fire Brigades Union their views on leading members, and I can report, and I think they'd be quite proud of me to say this, they did hope that it would be possible to have a black or Asian member of the Assembly appointed, because this would give a strong signal to reinforce the equal opportunities policies within the Fire Brigade itself, which has sort of run a bit into the ground, hasn't maintained the earlier momentum I established in the early 1980s.
Thank you. Next question is your question 19. It's from Graham Tope. It concerns the recent elections.
Thank you, Chair. Can I have an oral answer as well?
This was the first GLA election, and it used arrangements unique to Britain. There is much to be learned from this experience. The Greater London Returning Officer will be submitting a report to the GLA on this first election. Thereafter, it is for the GLA itself to determine future arrangements via its electoral returning officer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to the Mayor for that answer, and we'll certainly all look forward to the report from the returning officer. The Mayor will be aware that the government had a very considerable information exercise and concentrated quite a lot on postal and proxy voting and also on the experiment with early voting. I wonder if the Mayor's aware that, in fact, many more voters spoiled their ballot papers in the Assembly election because they didn't know how to use them than actually voted by post, proxy and early voting together. And whether on reflection he feels that we will be able to do a lot better next time.
I think that something like 5% of the Assembly votes were wasted because people had not been properly informed how to fill them in. What is worrying is the government spent £4 million on that education exercise. Next time round, out of the GLA budget, which at the moment is £32 million, we will have to pay for the cost of this. Now, clearly, we're going to have to negotiate with government a quite substantial one-off increase in the GLA budget each election year if we're to do any justice to a proper education programme.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure the Mayor will have our support in ensuring that the public does understand both what the election is about and how to do it. Can I turn to the other aspect of the election, which was the count? I hope the Mayor, like me, looks forward to us moving into the 21st century and using not only electronic counting, but electronic voting in the not-too-distant future. But I wonder whether he shares my view that the first count being done by electronic means was not far short of a disaster, and wonder what he has in mind. I don't mean the result, I hasten to add. I mean the process and the very long delays and uncertainty about when results would be announced. And I wonder, therefore, what steps he feels we can take to ensure that that doesn't discredit electronic counting forever.
I may be wrong, but certainly I think it's the case that every single borough electoral returning officer in London declined the chance to conduct this election. Perhaps they had the foresight to realise it was not going to be an easy one. And clearly, for the people operating at the centre, dependent on what was or was not going wrong at the local district assembly counts, it was an absolute nightmare. All I can say was that, as soon as we were aware of the delays, candidates were told so we could go home and get to sleep. And I was very grateful of that, actually. But where blame lies, I'm not in a position to say.
I think my colleagues here are saying, Ken, you may have been told to go home, but the Assembly candidates weren't. There were some very, very angry people in the morning. Okay, we now move on to question 10. If I can say to colleagues, we're now moving into territory where some questions will be repeating earlier material, and there's a good chance we might get through all the questions if people are forbear. Okay, question 10. It's your question 20.
Oh, 20, right.
It's your question 20, and it concerns performance indicators and best value. Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I can see from here I need to help the Mayor when he finds the answer.
I've got it.
Have you? Right, well, it's question 10. It doesn't repeat anything we've had before. It asks how the Mayor intends to set performance indicators for the authority, etc.
Performance information for the GLA and its functional bodies will, where possible, be consistent with best value. It's intended that performance information will be collected regularly under 3 broad categories. These are service-specific, which will focus on the level of service delivered and relate to customer perceptions, and will aim to provide an accurate assessment of the quality of the services. The best value regime will provide indicators for the police and fire authority. For Transport for London, the London Development Agency and the GLA itself, interim indicators will be developed. Personnel and organisational best value indicators will focus on issues such as workplace competition in terms of gender and ethnicity and absence levels, and will largely be based on the relevant best value set out by the DETR and the Audit Commission in December 1999. Third, financial best value indicators will compare actual and budget data. Initial systems for collection of performance information have been developed in consultation with the functional bodies, and GLA officers will continue to work on these over the next few months. Further specific indicators will emerge in line with strategic direction of the authority and as areas of public interest and concern emerge. I believe that it is crucial that the GLA uses resources in the most cost-effective way possible, and I'll be using this performance management framework as one way to deliver this.
Well, thank you, Chair. That was very useful information, but it wasn't actually the answer to the question. The question begins by asking how does the Mayor intend to set the performance indicators, not necessarily what they will be. And whilst I welcome what the Mayor has said so far, I wonder if he will discuss with the Assembly, some of whose members I think probably have considerable experience of setting local performance indicators, how best to get the most meaningful and effective performance indicators for the role of this authority.
But we will be appointing a best value manager to oversee the process, and that person will clearly be accessible to members of the Assembly and will look for advice and guidance on how to proceed.
Further?
Does the Mayor agree that this is actually part of the Assembly's scrutiny role?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't mean, by the way, this particular question repeats, Graham. I'm just drawing attention for future reference. 11th question is your question 18, again from Graham Tope, and it concerns financial and other commitments or indicators of likely commitments that the Mayor's made to third parties. It's your question 18, Ken.
Well, Chair, can I save time? I think you were just a question early in your comment, because I think this question does largely repeat ground that we've already covered. I'm quite happy to receive a written answer and not to pursue it now, so that we can get on with question time.
Thank you very much indeed. Question 12 is also yours, Graham. It is your question 6. This is in question 6 as appears on your papers. Do you want an oral answer here?
No, Chair. Again, in the interest of getting on with question time, we covered this very fully under the second question this afternoon. If the written answer is going to say any different, I'd like to have it. If it says the same thing again, I don't want to hear it again.
No, it says exactly the same thing.
Jolly good. Thank you very much indeed. We move to question 13, which is your question 21. It's in the name of Valerie Shawcross, concerns education and training.
Chair, I've asked 3 questions broadly on the same theme, the linkages between the education service and regeneration in London, 21, 22 and 23. But I'm happy to take a written reply to all 3 of those in the interest of progressing towards the Greens questions, I hope.
I'm delighted with that because they're the longest answers.
This is inclusiveness on speed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Charlie. The written answers to questions 21, 22, 23. We now move to 16th question, which is question 24, which stands in the name of John Biggs, I believe. Yes. John, written or oral? Okay.
I have as yet made no decision on the structure of the Transport for London Board. However, I hope to be in a position to make an announcement on this matter shortly. At present, no directions have been drafted for Transport for London. However, I have no objection to when we do have some, to them being made public, subject to normal restrictions covering commercial and individual rights to privacy.
John?
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully just one supplementary, which is that I think we all agree that transport is the critical area on which the success of your term will be judged, and also that the mayoral campaign was massively dominated by the PPP question, which meant that all manner of other important questions weren't covered in the detail they should have been. You've announced that Mr MacDonald's going to carry out a review which will report in the autumn, but I think it's important that TfL hits the ground running. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts, and perhaps they could be presented in writing later as well to the Assembly, on the sort of directions you plan to give to TfL prior to the 3rd of July, I would hope, so it can hit the ground running.
Well, at the moment, TfL is answerable to government, and government bears the financial consequences. But I have, so far, in discussions with the interim director appointed by the government, developed a good working relationship. We're currently involved in a series of meetings in which the Deputy Mayor has also been involved, discussing how we will restructure the working arrangements of Transport for London, because I think there's a widespread dissatisfaction with levels of service and quality of service. And we are, I think, making very good progress, and hopefully by Friday, at the next meeting I'm having with the interim director, we will finalise a broad structure for how Transport for London will run. And proceed on that basis, and there will be an early report, but all that will be subject to government agreeing. So far, I have to say, in the suggestions I've made about the placement of individuals within the structure of Transport for London, Keith Hill, the government minister responsible, has been happy to endorse my decisions and be prepared to bear the financial burden of restructuring in advance of July the 3rd.
That's a reasonable answer as far as it goes, Chair, but I'd like to follow it up just briefly. I welcome your response that you will publish directions under Section 155. But it does seem to me quite critical that, as I said, if we are going to move forward in July, in partnership ourselves with yourself, you should publicise and make clear the priorities, the initial directions you're going to give to the Transport for London Authority. And I just wanted, hopefully, just a one-word answer, your confirmation that you will present that to the Assembly in good time prior to July so that we can consider it.
I'll certainly be with you before July the 3rd, and I'm also optimistic because I think one of the mistakes in the legislation, the initial proposals for the GLA, would have allowed me to appoint members of the Assembly to Transport for London. I have no idea why that was dropped. I think it's a mistake because you will have huge constituency pressures. I think it would be a mistake if GLA members were in any way cut out the loop. In my discussions with Anthony Meyer, the interim director, we have agreed to try and consolidate strategy in one body and preferably on one site eventually, and that should be close to the Assembly, and Assembly members will have access to it, so there can be a real input into the development of strategic policy.
Next question is your question 25. Question 25 on your list, Ken, and on that of the audience.
What number did you say, Trevor? My pager just went off with the message from Millbank.
I was going to say. I see. They gave you the one they took away from me.
They've not cut me off yet.
Right, okay. Question 25. In the name of John Biggs, and it concerns Dagenham. John, will you take a written answer?
I'd like an oral answer, please.
Right.
Mr. Mayor?
Here we are. Getting there. My project team has been in touch on a regular basis with Ford, the Department of Trade and Industry, the trade unions, the Thames Gateway Partnership, and the London boroughs of Barking, Dagenham and Havering, and the London Manufacturing Group. It is our judgment, following from these discussions, that the future of the Dagenham plant cannot be guaranteed in the medium to long term without the maintenance of car assembly at Dagenham. We have explained this to Ford, the Ford Motor Company, and I have to say so, I personally have done so in the strongest possible terms, and we have explained the same position to the government. The team is working closely with government on a coordinated approach to the area as a whole, bringing together commitments from Ford, the government, and in future the London Development Agency. This includes pressing for government resources for the area. We have urged the Ford Motor Company to look again at the proposals made by the government for assistance in investment programmes to allow continuation of car assembly at Dagenham. The approach will involve working with and through the local partners who have been kept up to date on all our discussions so far and with whom a roundtable meeting will shortly take place. All parties have agreed that manufacturing is essential to the area's future.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly then, I welcome your reply. Clearly, it has a profound constituency interest for me and also for other Assembly members. I take it then that you're happy to lead a campaign to Ford, publicly if necessary, to secure continuing car production at Dagenham. I think there are a number of options which have been discussed with the unions, and that this would be a very viable way forward for the area.
I certainly would want to be involved in such a campaign. I think we're not thinking about anyone leading it because there's a huge consensus. I found when I met Stephen Byers at the Department of Trade, there was not a single item of disagreement between us. When I met him, it was before I had met with Ford. All the points I put to him, he had already put to Ford. I think there's an amazing unanimity across the whole political spectrum on our approach to Ford on this. And I did remind Ford most strongly that Ford came to what is our predecessor organisation, the old London County Council in the 1920s, and asked London ratepayers to build an estate to provide a workforce where they constructed a factory. As the descendants, if I can put it that way, of the London County Council, we, I think, have a right to say that now Ford has a duty to put something back into the community as it's winding down, because the community, London ratepayers, in today's prices, paid hundreds of millions of pounds to build the Dagenham estate.
Thank you, John. Next question is your question 27. It's in the name of John Biggs and it concerns planning application at Spitalfields Market. It's question 27. Written, do John, or would like an oral? Okay.
The Mayor will have no powers to direct a refusal of planning permission if the planning application has already been received by the local planning authority or will be received before the 3rd of July. In such circumstances, the local planning authority will not be obliged to notify the Mayor of the application.
I think that's a rather evasive answer with respect. I appreciate you want to get on to the green questions, but it does raise a quite important issue because you do have a reputation, which I'm sure is undeserved, for saying everything to every audience that they'd like to hear. Now, clearly this is a constituency interest for me as well, but it's also quite a critical interest for London. On the one hand, the demand for office and employment space for the City of London and our growth sectors. On the other hand, the concerns of a local community that they might be ridden over by such developments. I'd be interested, as I sure would Londoners, in hearing the general tone that you will adopt in considering such applications, because this would certainly be of a scale that would come to you if, as may happen, it has to be resubmitted.
I tried to avoid, through the election campaign, giving any specific commitment on a planning application that might come before the Mayor, with the sole exceptions of the ghastly development at Crystal Palace and the ghastly traffic-generating proposals at White City. Those are the only two comments. And those are planning applications, of course, that have already been agreed, so I was free to do so. I think I would open myself to a real problem of a legal challenge if I said anything at this stage about a planning application that I will have to consider in the light of all the details if and when it arrives on my desk. I really wouldn't want someone to be able to overturn my decision on the grounds I'd made up my mind before I saw the arguments. And given that the only thing I know about the Spitalfields development is what I read in the Evening Standard a few weeks ago, I suspect that isn't a wholly sound basis in law to actually pontificating about what I think about it at the present time. But I've established a precedent which I'm hoping we'll keep, which is that on these issues, local members of the Assembly who have a constituency interest should be present at meetings where the Mayor is discussing issues relating to their constituency. And clearly there'll be times when this breaks down. That's what I want to do. So, it would not be a question of you hearing my decision after the event. I'd assume you would be involved in the process of helping me make that decision.
I think perhaps it's in the spirit of this first question time that we're relatively gentle with the Mayor, so shall we move on, Chair?
God. Right. Okay. Next question is your question 27, and it concerns Battersea 28, I beg your pardon. 28 concerns Battersea Power Station from Samantha Heath.
There have been no negotiations on the Battersea Power Station development involving either the transitional LDA or the GLA transitional planning team. It is understood that in the past, the Government Office for London has assisted in resolving land assembly and access problems involving other public sector agencies and departments, but there has been no recent contact. An early SRB bid was also approved to improve local employment accessibility to new jobs, which were then thought to be imminent. Battersea is one of central London's largest brownfield sites, and its development has the potential to provide substantial new jobs, housing and business growth, which will further extend the South Bank as a successful new economic area for London and offer benefit to the nearby communities of London's South Central. Using the local partnerships and other agencies in the area, the London Development Agency will want to ensure, together with the developer, that mechanisms are in place to maximise the benefits of the development that the development can bring to local communities as well as London as a whole.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think you can understand that there's substantial public feeling on this particular site, and given that there may be a few controversies with regard to the planning application anyway, whether you've got a remit or not, but would you be prepared to meet with the local community groups to discuss their concerns?
I'd be delighted to meet with local community groups. The only caution I have here, it seems to me I've been hearing about planned developments of Battersea Power Station for the duration of my entire political career, and none of which has ever got anywhere. I hope there will be a development. It would be madness for us not to develop this site. But whether this development is going to be the one that goes forward or not, I have no idea.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you very much. Next question is your question 30. It's from Meg Hillier and concerns...
Oh, it's my question.
I beg your pardon.
Can I just say, given that if you give me the written response, I'm quite happy to have a written response.
Yeah, I will do if I know what question we're on at the moment.
Okay. Don't worry about it.
No.
It was question 30.
Don't worry about it.
But you don't have to answer. Don't worry.
But could you note that it comes back to me and not to Meg Hillier?
It is your question 30, and the questioner is Samantha Heath. It was
right. 30. Done.
The next question is your question 32. This one does come from Meg Hillier, and it's concerned to East London Line. Meg, written?
An oral answer, please.
Without wishing to prejudice the outcome of consultation process on the development of the transport strategy for London, I'm happy to support this scheme and support efforts to secure its timely completion.
Meg?
Thank you. One of the concerns of those of us involved with it locally are that with the ongoing debate about the funding for the entire underground improvements that need to take place, that this could get lost. And will you commit to treating this as an independent project from the main funding of improvements to the tube?
I've got to get some money out of the government before I commit myself to spending it. All I would say on this is that London Transport's work suggests a cost of £500 million, including the rolling stock. But the benefit-cost ratio is 4 to 1, which is very good by railway standards. So this clearly, in terms of value for money, would be one of the highest calls on any capital expenditure we get. But I am hoping to go to see the Chancellor of the Exchequer, my old mate, before the carve-up on transport spending is announced in July. And I hope to go in company with the main London business organisations and City Corporation to argue the case that London requires a major transport infrastructure injection if we're able to continue to see ourselves making the sort of contribution we do to the overall national economy.
Thank you very much. The next question is your 35. This is the Mayor's goal. Yes, Mayor's goal from Andrew Pelling. Would you be happy with a written answer, Andrew?
Actually, I'd be quite happy to have both a written answer and an oral answer. I hang
Okay,
on every word
okay, we've
with
got the
mayor.
point. Right.
I'm sure he'll have time to give
Yes.
you the written answer afterwards.
I'm tempted to say I'd just be happy to have a system of answering the questions a bit more slip along than this. I don't have the slightest doubt that getting the congestion charge right is the single biggest issue facing the GLA. If we get it right, it will become the pattern for transport, changing transport usage throughout cities, throughout the country, most properly spreading to cities all over the Western world. No other city has introduced, of this size, has introduced something like the congestion charge. If we get it right, it will affect all the patterns of transport usage in the developed world. If we get it wrong, it will set the whole process back by a decade. If I get it wrong, I will not get my second term. If I get it right, I have every chance of getting re-elected. That is my prime objective.
Andrew, you have to turn on your...
I could ask a supplementary, please. I'm very grateful for the very clear answer. You mentioned earlier the importance you'll place on consultation. I think that is something to be welcomed. When you consult on the congestion charge, will you consult both on how it is to be introduced and indeed whether it should be introduced?
I'm not going to consult on whether it's been introduced because I think there is a broad majority in favour of a congestion charge at political level. The opinion polls in London have shown narrow results one way or the other. I made it absolutely clear every stage in the election that in voting for me, I would try and introduce a congestion charge. And so what I'm saying now is let's not waste 2 years in a debate about which we effectively had in the election. But I'm asking everybody in London with an interest, join me in getting it right. Join me in making sure we get the area right, the exemptions right, the charges right, so that we can end up saying at the end of 4 years, we have done something that's really improved the quality of life for Londoners. Because if we can't tackle pollution, it all sounds very technical and so on, but the reality is 1 child in 7 in this city has asthma. Thousands of elderly people die prematurely of respiratory ailments caused by pollution in the winter. And half of all the kids who live on a main road have asthma. And all of us sitting in this room are doubling our chance of dying of lung cancer because of the nature of our air quality. It would be so easy to just let this carry on. This is before you even get onto the issues of the £10 billion that the CBI estimate we lose in terms of congestion, in terms of its impact on our economy. It would be completely negligent to just flap around and debate the issue. Let's make sure we can get it right and get it in.
Second supplementary, please.
Right.
I appreciate that you have a mandate, having been elected, but also there was an Assembly election on the same day, when the Conservatives were elected on the basis that they were opposed to congestion charges, and on the front page of the London manifesto of the Labour group said...
warn you, Andrew, if you go down this road, I am going to have to give Toby Harris another chance.
I'm quite happy for him to do so.
John?
It also says on the front of the London manifesto, no congestion charges. So there must be some confusion as to whether indeed there is an overall mandate from the election, and indeed that it was a conclusive result, because it would appear that the 2 main parties ran under the slogan of no congestion charges. I appreciate that there's a change of nuance since the election, but can you understand that point?
I just think it's something bizarrely masculine about us all sitting here arguing about who's got the biggest mandate. The reality is the Liberal Party, the Green Party and myself as an independent all campaigned strongly on this issue, and some of the minor party standing. Add those votes all together, there was a majority on the first ballot. And I have to say it's bizarre. The parties who didn't win are now actually asking that we should all be bound by their manifestos, you know. Why don't we just go forward as a happy, comradely group to do our best for London?
Now, Toby, would you like to add into the happy, comradely spirit here?
I refer everyone to the statement I made earlier, which reiterates what is in the Labour Party's manifesto, which has been confirmed not only by the Labour members, but also by the Prime Minister, and indeed by this Assembly.
All right, let's get on with it. Now, next is question 33, also in the name of Andrew Pelling. which concerns whether the Mayor has been riding the Croydon tram link or not. Would you be happy with a written answer?
I'm sorry that you're not so enthusiastic about Croydon. I'd be very happy to have both an oral answer and a written answer.
No, I love Croydon. It's simply answers. Okay, let's, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. I wasn't aware of it. I support the view that Croydon tram link should be fully integrated into London's public transport system, and passengers should be able to purchase tickets for onward rail journeys. I understand that travel cards are valid on tram-link services. However, I've asked officers to prepare a detailed briefing on your areas of concern and report back to the Assembly as soon as possible.
Right.
I'll take the next question, please.
The Connex. I was going to ask you if you would do the written answer. Since there is a motion down here, we will be debating this.
Very interested to hear what the Mayor's position is before the debate takes place.
This is your, yes, this is your 34, Ken, and it concerns
I have very considerable sympathy with London commuters who suffer unreliable, dirty and late train services. Improving rail services across the board is a major priority. With respect to the matter in question, I will write to the Shadow Strategic Rail Authority, drawing their attention to the matter you have raised and asking what steps they're planning to take to remedy the action.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent. Your next is 31, also named Andrew Pelling, and it concerns household waste collection in Sutton.
All options will be considered within the development of the strategy, but there will be tough targets to meet, which will call for tough measures. One of the reasons why recycling rates are so low at the moment is that it's easy to throw waste away without a second thought, but often less convenient to recycle. Sutton have been one of the leaders in London with regards to recycling and deserve congratulation. The percentage of waste recycled or composted in Sutton was the highest in London at around 35% in the last financial year. And I think we will have achieved a lot if we can make that the figure for London as a whole over the next 4 years.
Happy with that?
So I'd like to ask a supplementary, if I may.
Okay, jolly good. Go ahead.
I think it is indeed important that we have ambitious plans in terms of recycling for London, particularly bearing in mind that we're told that the means of disposing of much of our rubbish into the home counties will run out by the year 2010. But would you agree with me that it is not appropriate to sacrifice good public health by reducing the rate at which household collection of perishable rubbish is taken in Sutton for the sake of improving recycling?
I always think one of the defects of Prime Minister's question time is the way in which Prime Minister is expected to pontificate on everything on the face of the planet, usually when they know absolutely nothing about it. And I'm going to try and avoid getting drawn in these question times to, off the top of my head, making comments about the relative performance of boroughs, because I think I would need to have a session with the Borough Council leader concerned beforehand. All I would say is, on the face of the facts I've been given, Sutton looks like an example to the rest of London. And personally, I, as somebody who recycles all the household food refuge and sifts it themselves, I find it one of the most relaxing ways of getting away from the pressures of the political world. I recommend it. I recommend it to you all.
I shook hands with you before the meeting started, Ken.
I have to say, the vision of that, Ken, almost impels me to let us all take a break, but, but perhaps not. Okay, we now take 29, and also in the name of Andrew Pelling. This concerns masts, radio waves, telecommunications, the Stewart Report, and all of that.
Right. The spatial development strategy, which is what I suppose most of us call strategic plan for London, the spatial development strategy will provide a comprehensive framework for the spatial elements of my strategies, and I will set out my general policies for the development and use of land in London. I will consider all relevant reports in order to prepare a draft SDS on which there will be full consultation with Londoners.
Andrew?
Supplementary, if I may. First of all, I'm grateful for the distinction you made in the previous answer that you wouldn't interfere too much in individual borough affairs, and I think that is something to be welcomed. My supplementary on this particular item, bearing in mind our overarching responsibility to look at Londoners' health, do you think it would be appropriate for us to take part in consultation with boroughs about the placement of these telecommunication masts a good distance away from public buildings and from residential areas, bearing in mind the issues that were raised by the Stewart report about the health implications of such masts?
I have to say I share, I think, your concerns. The Department of Health report on the 11th of May from the independent expert group on mobile phones and health did state that on the balance of evidence, it did not suggest that mobile phones are a risk to health, but some biological effects may occur with mobile phone use, although these do not necessarily mean that health is affected. The report noted that there are currently gaps in scientific knowledge on these issues and recommended a very precautionary approach, especially with regard to the use of mobile phones with children. That reminds me very much of the way people talked about smoking when I first started working for the Chester Beatty Cancer Research Institute in 1962. The line was always, there is no evidence. It was also the response of the asbestos industry. There is no evidence. It was the response of Mrs. Thatcher's government about BSC. There was no evidence. The trouble is, it often, to get the conclusive evidence that shows a link, may take decades, even though you're aware, as we all were in the lung cancer research field, there was so obviously a link. It's only in recent years we've discovered it. And I think very much I do have concerns about mobile phone use. I try and restrict my own use of mobile phones. I try to use a hands-free system when I'm doing so. And I suspect it may be one of those things, perhaps it will all turn out to be all right, but perhaps 20 years' time, when we've all got the size of our heads dropping off, then they'll say, well, perhaps there was a problem after all. And this will fit the pattern of so many similar health disasters in the past.
Thank you very much. Okay. Aha. A green question.
Hooray.
We now move to your question 36, which is in the name of the leader of the Green Party. Darren Johnson concerns lobbyists. Darren.
Yes, well, we'll take the time to get our questions in earlier next time, so you don't all need to panic. But I would like an oral reply, please.
Which question was it again?
It's the one about the lobbyists.
I know, but the number. Give me the number.
36.
36. Right. Sorry about that. I obviously missed. The GLA will naturally be a focus for interest groups across London, and this is to be welcomed. It's only by listening to London's communities that we will be able to tackle London's problems. However, I'm strongly opposed to hiring commercial lobbyists to make cases that would otherwise stand or fall on their merits. I will seek to draft instructions to staff to avoid meeting with such people. I hope these will be introduced from July the 3rd.
Darren?
I very much welcome that. Do you not think there's also a case for a wider code of conduct in the way that we deal with commercial interests generally? For example, there may be an issue around secondments where commercial bodies may second people to the GLA, and that could in effect be lobbying in all but name if we don't have clear guidelines around that.
The business community came forward before the election and offered all the mayoral candidates secondees. I think 20 were mentioned. And I think we all made the point of view, yes, providing there is no direct commercial influence or conflict of interest, these people are bringing a genuine expertise, not to lobby for a particular position. And I don't think there will be any problem finding a code. The House of Commons code is quite detailed on this point, and members of the Assembly and the Mayor could just accept and operate on those principles. I have been struck over the years why it should be that major corporations spend thousands of pounds to employ a lobbyist firm to arrange an appointment with a minister, when the reality is that, if the firm was to make a direct contact with the private officers, they would be granted an audience either with the minister or with a senior civil servant. And that's certainly the basis on which I wish to proceed, that commercial firms will come directly to the mayor, not go through third parties and pay for the process.
Aaron?
In the interest of giving my colleagues a bite of the cherry, like some of our other colleagues in other groups have done, I'll not ask any more questions.
Thank you very much. Next question is your number 3. It concerns London Cycle Network. It's the name of Jenny Jones. Jenny, written on to do? Okay. Mr. Mayor?
As you know, I'm keen to support measures to promote the use of alternative forms of transport to the car, both including buses and cycles. For buses, there are 2 main programmes to improve services in London. The London Bus Initiative being implemented, currently being led by the Traffic Director for London, but this will transfer to Transport for London. This is targeted at 27 routes and is due for completion in 2002. Measures include countdown and camera enforcement of bus lanes through on-bus cameras. In addition, there is the London Bus Priority Network, which London boroughs have been implementing. This is about 40 to 50% complete, and completion under present plans is scheduled for 2003. With respect to the London Cycle Network, on the present rate of speed, this network will not be completed to 2006 or 2007. I find this unsatisfactory and will give it some attention. As you know, improvements to facilities to support these modes are high on my list of transport priorities. I have asked officers to consider how best I might accelerate the implementation of both bus and cycling priorities. When I have a clear indication of government financial support over the next 3 years, I will be in a position to provide you with a firmer indication of when these measures will be completed.
Can you give me some idea about whether it will be in your first term that the cycle network will be completed?
I gave a commitment that if I was elected mayor, the cycle route would be completed at the end of the first term. I think we all did that, and certainly that's my intention.
I hear that the London Cycling Campaign's offered you a bike, a free bike. Are you going to take that up, or do you think it's a bribe?
If the London Cycling Campaign are offering me a bike, it isn't a bribe. Unfortunately, I have a slight problem with balance and fall off them. All the most interesting scars on my body come from cycle and motorcycle accidents, so I've given up. I know you're all concerned for my health and longevity.
Well,
that was more than enough information.
No, I don't think you've got another. I think you've got another one. You know, if the mayor says he's unbalanced, I don't think we need to go any further. I don't think we need to go any further down that road. Thank you very much. Your next question is your number 37. It's in the name of Victor Anderson, and it concerns international environmental treaties. Victor, written do?
No, oral, please.
Well, I mean, it's not going to do you much good. I have no answer to give you on this. We have no expectations of when this will happen. I bet you're going to be better informed than I am, aren't you?
Would you like to follow up, Victor?
I hope that John Prescott doesn't forget this bit of the GLA Act, which is essential to the drawing up of all your 8 strategies. Will you ensure that when you do get this information from John Prescott, that you will fully take it into account in the drawing up of the strategies, especially the economic development strategy, and in particular the UK's obligations under the Climate Change Convention to cut carbon dioxide emissions?
I'll go one better. Why don't you draft a letter for you and I jointly to send to the Deputy Prime Minister, jogging him a bit on this issue?
I'm very happy to do that, yeah.
Jolly good, all this cooperation. Getting me very worried. Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions that were submitted last week. To bring everybody into the picture, there is a facility for Assembly members to submit further questions. All the questions you've heard were submitted prior to the publication of the Mayor's report. Assembly members have submitted questions subsequent to the publication of the Mayor's report based on whether maybe new information and so forth. And we are now going to take those. They are not separated out in the papers you've got, but as we've been doing so far, I will tell you what the numbers are in the papers you've got. Before we do that, Kenny, you happy to go on? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, right. What I'm also going to do, and I'm going to put it politely, I'm going to ask members' indulgence. Some of you have asked the same question on the report as you asked prior to the publication of the report.
I could do different answers if...
No, unless somebody really, really wants to be, you know, to stick to it, I'm going to go through those repeat identical questions. Where they're identical, I'm going to ask you not to go through the whole process again, because I think A, it'll be tedious, B, it'll make us look silly, and I don't think any of us wants that. Is that all right? Okay? Right, so I'm just going to go straight through them. Now we're going to get very complicated because we have to relate to your new numbers. Okay.
There's very few left. So
Yeah, we're on to the 30th question, which is your number 4, so, which is identical. Don't need that again. The old number 9 has been repeated. Don't need that again. Number 2, repeated. Don't need that again. Number 17, repeated. 5th question on the report from Roger Evans is concerned Elfipa, and it is your 38. It is, next one is your 38, and it concerns Elfipa, and it is from Roger Evans. Written answer do, Roger?
I think we'd better have an oral one on this.
Okay, Mayor?
Now that I have appointed Valerie Shawcross to chair the Fire Authority, I assume your first port of call will be her good presence rather than my own.
Do you want to follow that up, Roger?
I think I should follow that up, if only because the Mayor made a commitment during his election campaign to help restore fire services which had been cut by the government. And I would like to hear a reassurance from him that that is still his stance and that he will use his influence to work with me to approach Valerie Shawcross to make sure we get our fire engine back in Hornchurch. There are actually extremely good arguments for having that appliance, and I can introduce him to the firefighters and staff at the station who will brief him if he feels that would be useful.
Can I say, I think you'll have no problems getting sympathy from Valerie on this, because she was involved in a campaign to prevent the closure of either a station or the withdrawal of appliances in her own area of Croydon. I don't think we're in a position, until we get in to see the budget, about what we can do about restoring cuts that have been made. We'd certainly like to do so, but it may be very difficult. But I would actually like, perhaps it would help if I spelled out here, where I've appointed people to chair the police authority or the fire authority or whatever, I really don't want to get into a position of people coming round them to me. It would be best, I intend to concentrate, by being chair of Transport for London, on getting that right. And I would hope that members of the Assembly will, really just work with the people who are running these things. It isn't fair on them if people are coming to the Mayor and going round them. And I've given an undertaking both to Toby and to Valerie that I won't be meeting either with their chief officers or with members about things in their area without them present. Otherwise, you completely undermine the people you've appointed to get on with the job.
Do you feel you need to say?
I do really, because I think there's an important principle being established here which will concern other people on the Assembly as well. And that is that if you have made a manifesto commitment, I think you somehow have to direct the people who are running those services to help to deliver that commitment rather than just stand back from them. And I hope that you will keep some influence there. I'm quite happy to work with Valerie on this in the first instance. We've worked together before on other things. But if there is a problem, I would like to know that you are there to come to with the difficulty, and maybe you will use your good offices to resolve it.
I will always be there for you to come to.
Touching. Valerie, since you're a party to this, would you like to join this?
Yes, thank you very much. I think it would be everybody's intention to prioritise frontline services and the protection of human health, life and safety. However, having said that, I do think it would be very precipitous to actually talk about unpicking a budget that has already been put in place. I would hope that you would feel able to approach me directly and know that I would take any representations you were making exceedingly seriously. I think there are some very big and fundamental underlying issues in the fire service in London, and it's going to be a very challenging role, and I'm very glad that the Mayor and I have made a compact that we will actually consult each other on any major issues. So the question of going behind the back of either the Mayor or the Chair on an issue will not be the case.
Toby, I think you had a locus here. You had a
Well, the Mayor was kind enough to mention me. Could I just remind the Mayor that it is not within his powers to appoint me or any other person as Chair of the Metropolitan Police Authority. That is a matter for the Metropolitan Police Authority to elect a Chair when they are all appointed. However, I note what he said about not allowing people to go round whoever is Chair of the Metropolitan Police Authority, and I'm sure the future incumbent of that office will find that very useful.
Can I say, I think on those rare occasions where the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister and myself are all in agreement, it's quite likely Toby might get the job.
I see. Well, I don't know. This is a new open assembly, Ken. None of these things happen behind closed doors. Don't care who it is. Okay, next question is your 39. It's your 39, and it concerns the future of the Dome, and it is in the name of Valerie Shawcross. Valerie?
Written reply, Chair.
Valerie will take a written reply on this, so you don't need to find it.
I'm going to say I have nothing to do with the Dome.
Yes, well, that's fine. We've dealt with meetings with external organisations and so on. I'm going down the list as they were submitted, so we've dealt with GLA building, the new GLA building. We've dealt with John's on mayoral diary. Have we done that? I'm sorry. Is that... We haven't done that. I might have been asleep. All right. We're coming to... it's question...
11?
11.
It is your 11.
Yeah.
It's John Biggs's question.
I'm happy to publish my public and official engagements, though there will inevitably be some meetings that will remain private. I will consult with the officers of the authority about the best way of undertaking the publication.
I'm grateful for that, Chair. Just a brief supplementary, which is, given Ken's, and I think it's considered to be endearing, reputation for being somewhat haphazard in his attendance at meetings and late for them, and given the rumours that he's been hurtling around London in the backs of police vans in order to get to meetings, which may be untrue, does he consider that it's likely he'll be reviewing his decision not to have a mayoral car? I think a modest vehicle like a taxi or a moped might be appropriate.
And I mean, I'll continue to use public transport on those occasions where it doesn't work. I'll just get into a black cab like everybody else. I have to say that the story about my going to the meeting in Ford in the back of a riot van is true. The car that was due to pick me up at 9 o'clock outside the Tate on the night of the party wasn't there. And the very obliging police officer said, "We can get you to the meeting, sir." They bundled me in the back with half a dozen officers dressed in riot gear in the anticipation the anarchists were coming. We hurtled through central London with the siren going. And I phoned ahead to my economic advisor, who was actually at a pre-meeting with a senior official of the Department of Trade, and told them to come down and we'd pick them up on the way. They were then bundled into the back of the thing. The police concerned did take the opportunity of this half hour with the Mayor to lobby intensively on the issue of police pay. And the final joy was arriving at the front of the Hilton, where Ford had booked a room to hold the meeting, to have that nice man in the top hat open the side of the riot van where myself and the DTI official got out, to be greeted by Ford's European management, who looked less than impressed that we weren't in one of their cars.
John?
Well, I don't think that quite answered the question, did it?
I have to say that, you know, that being in the back of a riot van just brings back such wonderful memories. I never heard it being called lobbying before. John, do you want to follow up, John? Okay. All right, okay. The Mayor of Rome has a Lambretta, by the way, Ken. That's what he goes on. Right, next one is your question 12, and it concerns it's John on the accessibility to essentially your activities. Written, John, or oral? Written or oral? You'd like the Mayor to speak?
I do maintain a record of key decisions which are published in today's report to the Assembly. I would like to undertake a fuller publication of key decisions to Assembly members and of Londoners, but this will await the full establishment of the Mayor's office. I hope that publishing minutes will be possible in some cases, though I suspect it will not be in all. Many meetings would not take place if their minutes were going to be widely publicised, as with my meetings with Ford's European management.
No supplementary, Chair.
Thank you very much. The next question is reference to Council Hall, which we've dealt with. The question following that is your question 16. Am I right?
16 was County Ward.
I beg your pardon. Yes, and that is your question 7. This is where the systems, the wheels are coming off the system.
Done it.
And we've done that. The following one is a new one. It is Lynn Featherstone's 26, which concerns the index of local deprivation. Written or oral, Lynn?
Having waited this long, I'll go for oral.
Right, Mr. Mayor.
I've so far received no reply from the Deputy Prime Minister on the index of local deprivation. I hope that Assembly members will join me in arguing that the government should release the data underlying the index so that we can all see how this index has been developed, and then we'll be able to more easily make London's case against any reduction in our funding.
Supplementary. I would agree with that, absolutely, but I wonder if you would agree that the proposed changes in the index will disadvantage London's bids for SRB funding, and that the government's refusal to reveal that criteria is absolutely unnecessary secrecy, and that moreover, that this is actually a key test of your power to stand up and be a voice for London, and to make sure that money goes to where people need it and not to where Labour needs votes.
The problem we've got at the moment is that by not giving us the methodology, the government makes it impossible to have a rational decision. In any modern democracy with a written constitution, one would be able to go to the courts to get the release of this information. It's only in our rather more backward and archaic centralised state that governments can get away with this sort of thing. And it could be devastating. The business community calculate that if the figures as currently being discussed are not amended, London could lose £800 million a year, each year and every year. This would invariably mean an increase in poverty and deprivation in the areas that are already on the fringe of the worst areas of poverty and deprivation. I don't believe there's any borough council leader or member of this Assembly is not in agreement that this is a bad move for London, and there will be natural suspicion that the money that is being shifted away from London is overwhelmingly being shifted into the constituencies of cabinet ministers. And I have to say that is not a good way of proceeding. We need much more transparency in the allocation of government grant.
Second supplementary. If the government does release the data and it proves to be insufficient to substantiate the move, do you agree that this will be then a key test for your power as a voice for London?
I have to say the one good thing is that we are clearly no more than 18 months away from a general election. I would have assumed it would be extremely embarrassing for all those Labour MPs in London who have marginal seats if in the run-up to a general election London was seen to be being savagely damaged by a shift of resources on this scale. We had a major debate last year when councillors, MPs, all of us united to prevent a huge attack on education grant. We didn't manage to stop an attack on social services grant. We then saw the consequence of that. In order to protect social service budgets, councils across London decided to close libraries. Londoners were up in arms. I think we have to get across to the government, and particularly to MPs in marginal seats in London, that is not a row we want repeated in the run-up to a general election. And I think Londoners would punish us if we did that. So we've got to